If you're still moving, you ain't going to be dead.
But Ozzy, let me start with you. How are you? You've been through all this health hell.
I've finally had my last procedure 2 days ago.
Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary Prince of Darkness, has passed away at the age of 76, leaving the world in shock. After decades of groundbreaking music, wild antics, and unforgettable performances, his death marks the end of an era in rock history. What led to his sudden passing? What will become of the rock icon's legacy? Join us as we dive into the life of Ozzy, the man who reshaped rock and roll forever, and uncover the untold details surrounding his final days. On the morning of his passing, the news hit like a wave crashing over the rock world. Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath and the iconic figure often referred to as the Prince of Darkness, had died at the age of 76. His family issued a statement that immediately flooded the media and social platforms, confirming the heartbreaking news. The family described how Ozzy passed away peacefully, surrounded by love, with his closest family members by his side. The simplicity and depth of the words in the statement were a stark contrast to the larger-than-life persona that Ozzy had cultivated throughout his career. For fans who had followed Ozzy's journey for decades, the announcement felt like a personal loss. Ozzy wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural force who defined a generation. For many, he was the face of rock and roll, a wild and rebellious figure who, despite all his chaotic moments, still held a sense of authenticity that resonated with millions. His eccentric style, his unpredictable behavior, and his incredibly unique voice made him a household name, not just in the world of heavy metal, but in music at large. When news broke of his death, it wasn't just the passing of a rock star. It was the end of an era in the music industry. Ozzy had lived a long and tumultuous life, filled with highs and lows, triumphs and struggles. He had openly battled addiction, faced controversies, and endured numerous health issues. In recent years, his health had been a major topic of concern. Diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2019, Ozzy's health had steadily declined, but he remained a warrior, fighting through his pain and continuing to perform and record as much as he could. The announcement of his passing, while not entirely unexpected given his health struggles, was still a hard blow for his family, friends, and countless fans around the world. The statement from his family described how Ozzy's death came at a moment of peace, with his family by his side. While the details of his final moments were kept private, the family's request for privacy during this difficult time was met with deep understanding from fans who had admired Ozzy for so long. He had spent decades entertaining the world, and in his final moments, he was surrounded by the very people who had stood by him through all the ups and downs. The fact that Ozzy left this world in peace, surrounded by love, gave some solace to those who were mourning his loss. In the wake of the announcement, fans across the world began to flood social media with tributes, sharing their personal stories of how Ozzy had impacted their lives. For many, Ozzy's music had been the soundtrack to their teenage years and young adulthood. His albums with Black Sabbath, like Paranoid and Master of Reality, were not just records, they were milestones in the development of heavy metal as a genre. Ozzy's solo career, marked by hits like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley, continued to define him as one of the most influential rock stars of all time. But it wasn't just his music that fans loved. It was his personality, his courage in the face of adversity, and his ability to be himself, no matter what the world threw at him. Throughout his career, Ozzy had become a symbol of rebellion and resilience. He wasn't just a rock star, he was a symbol of survival. He had defied the odds, whether it was overcoming addiction or facing public scandal, and had done so with a sense of humor and humility that made him endearing to fans. His very public struggles, especially during the 1980s and 1990s, made him relatable. He instilled hard work and on-the-spot, blood, sweat, and body tatties, which is what he needed to survive. He was the rock star who survived, and his fans loved him all the more for it. He wasn't afraid to show his flaws, and in doing so, he became even more iconic. His death brought a flood of emotions for those who had followed his career for so long. For many, he was the first rock star they ever knew, the one whose music ignited their love for the genre. For others, he represented the embodiment of rock and roll itself, loud, wild, untamed, but always with a sense of authenticity. There were countless tributes from musicians, celebrities, and fans who had grown up listening to Ozzy's music. It should be that way forever. Being so close to the music, they shared memories of his electrifying performances, his legendary antics, and his impact on the music world. As the news spread, it became clear that Ozzy's legacy would live on. He had shaped the sound of rock music for generations, and his influence could be felt in the music of countless bands that followed in his footsteps. Ozzy's passing, while deeply saddening, only highlighted the incredible impact he had on the music world. His death marked the end of a chapter in the history of rock and roll, but it was also a reminder of the powerful legacy he left behind. In the end, Ozzy Osbourne's death wasn't just the passing of a man, it was the passing of an era. It was the end of an era for Black Sabbath, for heavy metal, and for rock music as a whole. Ozzy had been there from the beginning, and now, as the world said goodbye to him, it felt like the final curtain call for a genre that had changed the world. But even though he was gone, his music would live on forever, as a testament to the man who had given everything for his art and who had inspired millions along the way. Ozzy Osbourne's legacy would continue to rock the world long after his death, because legends never truly die. They live on through their music, their influence, and the stories they leave behind. Ozzy Osbourne, the iconic frontman of Black Sabbath, had always been known for his larger-than-life persona, his wild behavior and his raw, unforgettable voice that helped define the heavy metal genre. But beyond the antics, the fame, and the chaos, Ozzy had deep reflections about his past, particularly about Black Sabbath and the incredible journey the band had taken. Over the years, as the media stormed around him, Ozzy remained surprisingly introspective about his role in Black Sabbath and what the band had achieved. In an interview from a few years ago, Ozzy was asked about Black Sabbath's journey, and his thoughts were candid and filled with a sense of awe. Reflecting on the band's beginnings, he often mentioned how none of them could have predicted the level of success they would eventually achieve. Ozzy, who had come from humble beginnings in Birmingham, didn't start his journey thinking he would be a rock legend. In fact, he had trouble believing it even when the band was on top of the world. He was simply a man who loved to sing, and it was the music that pushed him forward, not the fame. Ozzy often recalled the early days of Black Sabbath, back when they were just starting to make their mark. He and Tony Iommi, the band's guitarist, had a strong connection, and it was their chemistry that formed the heart of Black Sabbath's iconic sound. While Tony was creating some of the heaviest riffs known to rock music, Ozzy's voice complemented the music perfectly, creating a sound that was unlike anything else at the time. The band's first album, Black Sabbath, was released in 1970 and took the world by storm. It wasn't just an album, it was the birth of a genre. As Ozzy described it, it was as if the band was walking through uncharted territory, creating something no one had ever heard before. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The rise to fame came with its fair share of challenges. Ozzy was open about the struggles he faced with addiction and how, at the time, he didn't know how to manage the chaos that came with being a rock star. The fame, the pressure, and the lifestyle had taken a toll on him and his bandmates, and there were times when it felt like everything might fall apart. But despite these struggles, Ozzy always came back to one thing: the music. Even when he was at his lowest, he found solace in performing and creating songs. It was clear that music was his lifeline, the one thing that kept him grounded. As Black Sabbath's career evolved, the band's influence on the music industry grew. They weren't just a band, they were an institution, an inspiration to generations of musicians. Bands from all corners of the rock world looked up to Black Sabbath, citing them as the driving force behind the heavy metal movement. When Ozzy reflected on this, he was humbled. He never set out to create an entire genre. He simply wanted to make music that resonated with him, but to see how deeply Black Sabbath's music had affected the world made him proud. Ozzy was particularly reflective when talking about Paranoid, Black Sabbath's second album. Released in 1970, Paranoid went on to become one of the most influential albums in rock history. It included some of the band's most famous songs, like Iron Man and the title track, Paranoid, which became anthems of a generation. But even as these songs were being created, Ozzy never fully realized the impact they would have. To him, they were just songs that came from a place of honesty and emotion. He was doing what he loved, pouring his heart into the music, not thinking about the legacy he was creating. Throughout his career, Ozzy had been known for his unapologetic attitude and his larger-than-life persona. But in private moments, he often spoke about how deeply he valued the relationships he had with his bandmates. As time went on, tensions within Black Sabbath grew, and Ozzy was eventually replaced in the band in 1979. For many fans, this was the end of Black Sabbath's golden era. Ozzy's departure was not just the end of a chapter for the band, but it was also a deeply personal loss for him. But looking back, Ozzy has always maintained a sense of gratitude for everything he experienced with Black Sabbath. He never took the band's legacy for granted, and he always knew that his time in Black Sabbath had shaped who he was as an artist. After leaving Black Sabbath, Ozzy went on to have a massively successful solo career. His album Blizzard of Oz in 1980 marked a new beginning for him, and he gained a new legion of fans. But he never forgot his roots in Black Sabbath. In interviews, Ozzy has admitted that he sometimes felt torn between his solo career and the legacy of Black Sabbath. There was always this sense that no matter what he achieved on his own, Black Sabbath would always be the foundation of his career. He'd often talk about how important it was to him to honor the band's legacy while continuing to create music that was true to himself. One of the most important moments in Ozzy's career came when Black Sabbath reunited for a final tour. Despite the ups and downs, despite the differences and the years apart, Ozzy, Tony, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward came back together to give the fans what they had been waiting for. The band's final shows were emotional, filled with fans who had grown up on Black Sabbath's music. For Ozzy, it was an opportunity to say goodbye to the band he helped shape, and to give fans a chance to see the magic one last time. He reflected on the band's journey, admitting that he never thought they'd get to this point. The idea of a farewell tour seemed so far-fetched in the early days, when they were just a group of young men playing in small venues. But as the years passed, Ozzy came to realize that Black Sabbath's legacy wasn't just in their music. It was in the way they had changed the world of rock. In his reflections, Ozzy was always quick to credit his bandmates and the people who helped him along the way. He acknowledged that he could never have done it alone. Black Sabbath was a collective effort, and he always made it clear that the band's success was a product of everyone's hard work and dedication. While Ozzy was the frontman, it was the synergy between him, Tony, Geezer, and Bill that created the unique sound that would go on to define a generation. As Ozzy looked back on his life, he couldn't help but feel grateful for everything he had achieved. He had never expected to become a rock legend, and certainly never imagined that he would still be here, decades after the start of Black Sabbath. But through it all, his love for music remained the driving force behind everything he did. The music never stopped, and neither did Ozzy Osbourne. Even in his later years, despite health issues and the challenges of Parkinson's disease, Ozzy continued to reflect on the impact Black Sabbath had on the world. He would never stop being proud of what the band accomplished, and the legacy they created was something he held close to his heart. The bond between him and Black Sabbath was unbreakable, even as time passed. And in every interview, every reflection, Ozzy made it clear, Black Sabbath was his family, and that legacy was something he would always cherish. Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath, came from humble beginnings that were a far cry from the rock and roll stardom he would eventually achieve. Born John Michael Osbourne on December 3, 1948, in Birmingham, England, he grew up in a working-class neighborhood. Life was tough for Ozzy and his family, but it shaped him in ways that would later influence his music and career. Ozzy's early years were marked by struggle and hardship. His father worked long hours as a laborer, and his mother was busy taking care of the household. The family didn't have much money, but they managed to get by. Ozzy, as a young boy, found himself in a challenging environment. He had trouble at school, where he was often teased and struggled with his studies. He was dyslexic, which made things even more difficult. School wasn't a place where Ozzy felt like he belonged, and this made him feel like an outsider. He later reflected that school felt like a place where he just couldn't fit in, and that feeling followed him for many years. Despite the challenges at school, Ozzy found comfort in music. He was drawn to it from a very young age. His parents played a role in this, introducing him to music early on. His mother was particularly fond of Elvis Presley, and Ozzy was captivated by the energy and presence of rock and roll. It wasn't long before he developed a passion for music, and it became his escape from the struggles of everyday life. Music gave him something to focus on and a way to express himself, even though he didn't have the skills or the confidence at first to pursue it seriously. Ozzy's love for music led him to pick up a guitar, but he quickly realized that his true calling was in singing. He started to experiment with his voice, trying to emulate the sounds of his musical idols. As he got older, he began to form a deeper connection with music, and it became his dream to become a performer. However, the road to success was far from easy. Ozzy didn't have the money or connections that many of the more privileged musicians did, and he had to make do with what little he had. As a teenager, Ozzy's life took a more rebellious turn. He started hanging out with a rough crowd, getting into trouble, and testing boundaries. His early adult years were marked by a series of dead-end jobs, including working as a laborer, a plumber's apprentice, and a factory worker. He wasn't cut out for this life, though, and he found himself yearning for something more. His passion for music was still burning inside him, and it wasn't long before he decided to take the plunge and pursue it full-time. In his late teens, Ozzy found himself playing in small local bands, trying to get noticed and get gigs. It was a tough life, but it was what he loved. During this time, he met Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, 3 other musicians who would go on to form the legendary band Black Sabbath. They all had different backgrounds and experiences, but they shared a love for heavy, gritty music. The band was born out of this shared passion, and they soon started to make a name for themselves in the local Birmingham music scene. For Ozzy, Black Sabbath was a turning point. The band's sound was different from anything else that was out there. It was heavier, darker, and more experimental. The raw power of the music spoke to him, and he poured everything he had into his vocals. The band's early shows were rough, and they had to fight for recognition. But they weren't just trying to play music. They were trying to create something new. They wanted to push boundaries and make people think, feel, and react. Their early days weren't easy, and they struggled to get attention. However, Black Sabbath soon caught the ear of a record label, and their self-titled debut album was released in 1970. The album was revolutionary. It was heavy, it was raw, and it had a sound that had never been heard before. It wasn't just music, it was an experience. The album laid the foundation for what would later be known as heavy metal. Ozzy's distinctive voice, paired with the crushing riffs from Tony Iommi's guitar, created a sound that was unlike anything else. The band quickly began to build a loyal fan base. Despite the success of Black Sabbath, Ozzy's personal life wasn't without its struggles. The pressures of fame began to weigh on him, and his personal demons, including addiction, took a toll on his career. He had to fight through personal battles, but the music was always there to pull him through. His experiences with addiction were well documented, but he remained determined to continue creating and performing. His ability to push through the struggles made him an icon in the rock world. While his personal life was often chaotic, his dedication to his music never wavered. Looking back, Ozzy reflected on his journey and how far he had come. From his humble beginnings in Birmingham to becoming one of the most recognizable names in rock history, Ozzy had defied the odds. He often spoke about how grateful he was for his success, but he also acknowledged the challenges he had faced along the way. He had never expected to become a rock legend, and in many ways, he still didn't see himself that way. To him, he was just a man who loved music and was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. Ozzy's journey wasn't just about fame and fortune. It was about his love for music and his determination to make something of himself, despite the odds stacked against him. He was an unlikely hero of the rock world, but his story was one of resilience and passion. From a young boy with dreams in Birmingham to the frontman of one of the most influential bands in music history, Ozzy Osbourne had truly lived a life that defied expectations. And through it all, his passion for music remained his guiding light. Black Sabbath's legacy is one that cannot be overstated. As the pioneers of heavy metal, they fundamentally changed the sound and direction of rock music. And Ozzy Osbourne's role as the frontman was a crucial part of their success. Before Black Sabbath, the world of rock music was largely dominated by classic blues-based bands, but Black Sabbath introduced something new, something darker, heavier, and more experimental. They crafted a sound that would go on to inspire countless bands and become the foundation for the genre of heavy metal. The band's music was characterized by thunderous riffs, haunting lyrics, and a sense of darkness that set them apart from the typical rock acts of the time. Ozzy Osbourne's contribution to Black Sabbath's sound was monumental. His distinct voice became the voice of the band, helping to define their image. With a unique combination of powerful raspy vocals and an almost eerie haunting delivery, Ozzy gave the band a sound that was instantly recognizable. His voice became synonymous with heavy metal, and his stage presence, a mix of chaos, energy, and authenticity, was magnetic. Fans flocked to see the band, not just for the music but for Ozzy's persona as well. He was the perfect embodiment of the rebellious spirit that would come to define metal culture. The band's 1970 self-titled debut album and subsequent records like Paranoid and Master of Reality were groundbreaking in their time. Black Sabbath's music pushed the boundaries of what was considered rock music, incorporating heavy, doom-laden riffs, dark subject matter, and a raw, gritty sound. Their impact on the music world was immediate. and they helped to shape the genre of heavy metal into something that would continue to evolve and inspire generations of musicians. But it wasn't just their music that left a lasting impact. It was the attitude they brought with it. Black Sabbath became symbols of rebellion and defiance, and Ozzy was at the forefront of that. He represented the underdog, the outsider, and the voice of those who didn't fit into the mainstream. His candidness about his struggles with addiction and his unpredictable behavior only added to his mystique, making him even more of an icon in the eyes of fans. Ozzy's personality both on and off stage helped to fuel the image of heavy metal as a genre that didn't care about rules or conventions. Ozzy's impact on music is undeniable. His unique voice and persona not only helped Black Sabbath become one of the most influential bands in rock history, but they also paved the way for the countless heavy metal bands that followed. His influence can be seen in bands from Metallica to Iron Maiden, all of whom cite Black Sabbath as one of their main inspirations. Ozzy's legacy extends far beyond his time with Black Sabbath. His solo career, too, has seen massive success and continued to cement his place in rock history. The way Ozzy and Black Sabbath crafted their sound and defied expectations helped to carve out a space for heavy metal in the world of music. What started as a small band from Birmingham grew into a global phenomenon, influencing not just rock, but pop culture as well. Ozzy Osbourne's impact on music is immeasurable, and his place in the pantheon of rock legends is secure. Black Sabbath's legacy, shaped by Ozzy's distinctive voice and presence, will continue to inspire and influence musicians for generations to come.